Welcome to the Porn Reboot podcast, where you get practical tips to gaining control over your porn or sex addiction. We help ambitious men end their out-of-control sexual behavior with pornography, sex, and masturbation so that you can maximize your life, perform at your potential, and remain in control in the driver's seat, which is where you have to be in order to gain or maintain the success you want in life. I'm your host, J.K. Emezi, certified sex and porn addiction recovery coach. Welcome to the episode.
Today we're going to talk about the success rebooting paradox, as I call it, that successful men deal with when it comes to rebooting from an out-of-control sexual behavior. And you can also apply this to any sort of recovery work that you're doing from some other compulsive behavior. I call it a paradox because a lot of men think that being successful means that you don't have an out-of-control behavior, or that their out-of-control behavior is holding them back from success. I believe this is a very dangerous way to look at it. I don't think it's something that you should look at as black or white. In my case, personally, it wasn't just the compulsive behavior, but it was the things I was medicating with the compulsive behavior, as well as, to a lesser extent, the symptoms of the compulsive behavior that were holding me back from success. So you're being hit from two angles: behaviors and thought patterns and emotions that you are unaware of because your behavior is masking them, and then the symptoms of your behavior as well. And when you come into a program like Porn Reboot, one of the things we do is we make that clear to you. This is also the reason why pornography addiction and sexual addictions are so dangerous compared to others. They are very dangerous because they completely warp the way that you view your life. You can live your life for decades completely blind to why you are not successful in multiple areas of your reboot capital, whether it's your spiritual life, your health, your family and social life and relationships, your finances, your ability to plan your life, and your mental health as well. It's also the reason why you will hear me speak a lot on the philosophy of recovery and the philosophy of rebooting. And that's so important because the philosophy allows you to develop principles. And the principles is the place from where your values and your standards are developed. The values and standards are the things that allow you to maintain the habits that are going to get you off your behavior. And then the habits is what your lifestyle, your reboot lifestyle is built on. And that reboot lifestyle that you have is what your self-image is ultimately going to be built on. Your self-image changes based on you living this lifestyle for a long period of time. And while this can be applied to, again, any addiction, it is especially true for pornography addiction and other sexual compulsions. Today, in particular, I would like to talk about that paradox, because I keep being surprised by the surprise that I hear in a man's voice when he says, wait a minute, like there are successful guys who deal with a problem with pornography. I thought that if you quit porn, you would become successful. No, that's a very simplistic way of looking at it. I became successful due to my ability to overcome my behavior. But again, like I said earlier, it was also because I was able to get out of my own way while I was rebooting. I was able to see the things that were holding me back. And, once I also got rid of the symptoms, things moved forward. But there are plenty of men in the intensive program who are already wildly successful. There are men who their personal take-home is $500,000, $750,000 a year. That's what they take home. And this is just salary plus commissions in what they're doing. And there are individuals who make much more than that, but they still deal with an addiction to pornography. For some of them, it is preventing them from growing, but they're still making a really good income. They still have a beautiful family. They still have a lot going on for them. For others, it has destroyed their life, and it's in the process of destroying it. So again, it's all across the board. I want to talk about the 6 things that affect this paradox. And I hope this is going to make sense because I'm doing this based on just the 6 things I listed out. I haven't outlined this any further than that. But this is what I have learned from working with very successful individuals in overcoming their behavior, both individuals who lost everything, individuals whose businesses were thriving, but their marriage was affected by this, or their mental health was affected by this, and from myself as well, as somebody who was not financially, relationally, spiritually, mentally, or emotionally successful, who has achieved wealth in most of those areas. There are some areas in my life that still need a lot of work, but I think I'm in a unique position as a coach who is successful to speak about this. So the first thing is an identity crisis. And an identity crisis happens with a successful individual when their self-image does not match their behavior. You view yourself as a person who is good, who is successful, who is generous, who lives a certain type of way, who is a role model, who is a leader. And sometimes if we were to get deep into the type of work you do, it might be work that is very sanitized. It might be work that is very, what's the word for it? Very conservative in nature. And it does not match with the type of pornography you're watching. It does not match with some of the creepy behavior that you engage in. It does not match with some of the things that you engage in when you're on trips. None of that stuff matches. And the more you sweep this behavior under the rug, this Jekyll and Hyde, these 2 different personalities, the more you hide that personality that keeps getting wilder and wilder and wilder, as you get older, this becomes very, very challenging to face. In fact, it is usually in a man's 40s that I've noticed that all of this stuff comes bursting out. Men are usually able to keep this repressed well into their late 30s, but then the cracks start showing around that time. There's some who are very mentally resilient and can push it into their 50s. But it usually takes a crisis at that point for a man to admit that, okay, I think I have a problem. The crisis is usually like them losing their relationship or their business being put at risk. But that identity crisis is a really big thing that affects a lot of successful men. It prevents you from seeking help with your behavior as well. The next thing is the pressure that you have to deal with as a successful individual. You're dealing with a lot of external pressure. Some of this pressure is from expectations. Some of it is just from your workload at your job. Some of it is to save, manage investments. I think there are a lot of men. I was having this conversation, I think 2 days ago with one of my clients, and he's up and coming. He's doing well. He's got a 6-figure income, a young guy. I think he should have just turned 30. And we were talking about how as you get older, some people think that reaching their financial goals is the be-all, end-all of, especially men. And they feel that, well, then I'm going to be able to take care of my family, go on trips, and I'm not going to, even if I had stress, it's going to be more enjoyable stress. It doesn't work like that. If you don't do it the right way, if you don't structure it a certain way, it becomes very stressful. I would argue that in general, the wealthier you become, the higher your income becomes, and the more responsibilities you take on, the more stressful it is. Sure, you might be able to go on nicer trips. You may be able to help others and be very charitable. You may be able to fulfill some of your desires and the desires of others, like, oh, there's something I want to do for my mom or my dad or my church. But on the other hand, it does come with risk. It comes with tax risks. It comes with being people wanting to sue you more, so you become a bigger target for all sorts of things. It comes from alienation in relationships, which I'm going to actually talk about in a little bit. You become very alienated, and it comes with more fear and attachment. You have more to lose. So your entire identity changes as well, and you look back on what you've actually sacrificed. A lot of the things that you have sacrificed in order to attain this sort of success in your life, you can never get them back. And so you have no choice but to double down on what you have. You're like, fine, if I sacrifice so much of time and relationships that I'll never get back, then I better take best care of what I have now. I need to be a great steward of the wealth and the freedom and the relationships and whatever has come from success. That comes with a lot of pressure because life doesn't give a shit. Anything could happen and take all of that away from you. I'm not saying that that will happen, but what I am saying is that it puts a lot of pressure on the successful. Something that not only leads to you leaning in more on this behavior, but makes it very difficult for you to seek help for multiple reasons. Like, where do you find a professional who can help you, who actually understands and empathizes with the pressure that you're dealing with? Where do you find someone like that? What's the impact of letting go of a coping mechanism that you use to manage this pressure? Like, are you going to be able at this point in your life with this level of success to let go of something that was so dependable? And for those of you who may not be where you want to be in life yet, you might find it surprising to go like, wait a minute, you're trying to say that there's some successful individuals that used pornography and sex as a coping mechanism and got successful in multiple areas of their life? Yes, they made it in business, in their career. They have a six-pack. They have a beautiful partner. They have a lot of things going on in life. But they are severely addicted to the out-of-control behavior. Their entire life is designed to take care of that behavior, and that behavior takes care of them. It's like a secret relationship that their entire life is dependent on, and nobody knows. In fact, they are also oblivious to all of the little areas in their life where they are not showing up. They just don't even see that. Their wife actually thinks that this is their personality. Their wife has never seen who they truly are. Their wife thinks that, hey, he's a caring father. He's sometimes busy and irritable. He works all the time, but that's just who he is. You know, he goes for all these long business trips, and I don't know what he's up to, but that's what he does. And he provides. So all in all, he's a good man. Without knowing that there are many, many layers to your life. She thinks like, well, he's stressed from work, so, he can't have sex that often. She doesn't know that you're jerking off at work. She doesn't know that you're keeping side pieces. She has no idea of all the other things that you're doing. So the external pressure is something that actually keeps you trapped. The third one is a struggle with autonomy. Autonomy is the ability to govern yourself. So basically, to treat yourself as a being and also treat yourself as the government of yourself. So you set the rules and the laws for yourself. You tell yourself what you can do and what you can't do, not someone else or some other entity doing that for any aspect of your life. So the word autonomy comes from the Greek word auto, which is self, and nomos, which is rule or governance. Originally it's when a small city in Greece or within the Greek Empire grew large enough to become independent and not dependent on the capital, it was then described as autonomous. So it became a city-state. We, as human beings, we desire ultimately to be autonomous, but many of us are not. For those of you who aspire to great success, I want to warn you that in the process of going for success, it is very possible to achieve all the things you want to achieve, whatever it is, the home, the financial freedom, the health, all those things, and not be autonomous. You can be run by your wife. You can be run and governed by the government. Like the government has a say in everything. I know people who are one person in a government entity away, that person just not liking you, making one statement and not renewing a contract, and they are one step away from poverty. And when I say poverty, I mean they're losing the $3 million house, their wife is going to leave them, kids are getting pulled out of private school. Everything is dependent on just one thing changing. And they're okay with that because they just don't pay attention to that. They're like, the chances of that happening are very low. But the moment that it is threatened, that creates a lot of stress within them. The same thing for those who are governed by their wives. Many men will not admit to it. But if you are a happy wife, happy life kind of guy, if you're a she's the boss kind of guy, if you're the let me go and talk to my wife kind of guy, if you are like, we are partners, and it's one thing to say like we are partners in life, it's another thing to be like, we're a partner in every decision we make. We always make decisions together. That's the way we did things. We do things. And those decisions don't really have to do with the family. They're not familial decisions. They're decisions about things you want to do on your own. You still have to consult with your wife on those things. Then you are not autonomous. And men, especially successful men who are not autonomous, find it very difficult to break away from their behavior. But as you may be starting to notice, all these things I'm mentioning that are unique to successful men, whether it is an identity crisis, dealing with external pressures, or not being autonomous, are the things that are being medicated by your behavior, and they're also the things that are holding you back from getting help from your behavior. They just are more apparent to a coach like me when I see a successful man, but he does not see that. So please, 2 messages. One, for those of you who are aspiring to success, whatever you define success as, I would encourage you to include autonomy as one of those requirements for success, which means that you are not being regulated by anybody, which means that your business, your family, your physical freedom is not dictated by somebody else. You want to have as much freedom as you can in this world we live in. And when I say in this world we live in, I'm not saying break any rules or break any laws. There are laws and there are rules, but you don't have to walk into them all the time. You don't have to put yourself in a position where you are regulated. Even if you have to be regulated, don't put all your eggs in one basket. Put something on the other side, or get into relationships with people and entities that give you more freedom. Be in a relationship with a woman who gives you freedom to have your own space and to do your own thing. People who do not have any sort of undue leverage on you. The same applies to your mind and your emotions. You want to have autonomy over your mind or your emotions. I have a rule that if I wake up for 3 mornings in a row thinking about someone, and we are not fucking and you are not family, then it's time for you to leave my life. That is important for my mental and emotional autonomy. Anybody who is trying to impact me in that way, and affect me rather, not affect me in that way, is somebody that is taking away from my autonomy, or whatever energy they're bringing to me is taken away from that. So that's an example. Moving on, the 4th thing within this paradox is existential dissatisfaction. This means that once you started accomplishing all your different financial goals, you get to a point where you're able to start reflecting on your life and what you want. But you quickly start to find that you can't have everything. You really can't. I'll use myself as an example. As my businesses started becoming more successful, I decided to do one of the things that I've always enjoyed doing, which is traveling. Traveling more, seeing the world, meeting people, and just scratching that itch for adventure and history. And I like specific types of places. I'm a person who really likes architecture. I like certain types of peaceful, open environments. I love all these different places. I won't geek out and go into that, rein myself in. But I found that I started having an attachment to all these places. And as I go to different countries and different continents, I come to find that, man, like, you can't keep any of these experiences. You can have the experience in the moment, and you'll go to another place which is just as cool or cooler, but it's it's thousands of miles away. And sure, you experience it and it's cool, but you're always going to go back home physically, or you're going to go back to an emotional home or a mental home. And it was actually this summer when I was traveling through Europe that I realized why some people are addicted to traveling. I and one of my friends, who is a fantastic traveler, his name is Prashant, are putting together a program called Reboot, which allows individuals who work from home. It shows you how you can work from anywhere in the world. It talks about the tech you travel with, how to have conversations with HR, how to run meetings from different places, the psychology behind not creating drama with your managers or your coworkers or your team when you are traveling. And it also tells you how to manage time zones and how to be efficient when working, as well as your mental health and your emotional health. And it talks about how it actually makes you a productive person, a more ambitious person, and it keeps your dopamine levels optimal while you're doing this. It's very, very fascinating what we're creating. But while we were creating it, we really got into some deep conversations about the human state and why some people just travel. Like there's some people who deal with the pain in their life by booking a ticket for their next vacation. Because when you can plan your next vacation or your next acting out or your next whatever it is you're going to get, whether it's with food or whatever it may be, but in this case, we're talking about vacations, you feel better. Some people do it to the point where while they're traveling, they're booking and planning the next thing they're going to do because they're in such a high dopamine state, a high state of endorphins. My point is, learning this, I came back to Kansas, to Wichita, to my simple life here. And I realized that wherever you go, there you are. And your being is a wave. It is never static. It is always undulating. It is always flowing and moving up and down. It doesn't matter where you are. So when you're in one place and you feel great, it's an illusion that you're going to find happiness there because you are going to regulate and normalize to whatever your base internal state is. And the more successful we become, we often need more reasons to be successful. I tell brothers in the implementation program or my mentorship clients from 20s Mentor, I'm like, the reason that you are not successful is often because you don't have enough reasons to be successful. Most people who are not born with that innate drive to be ambitious constantly find themselves losing motivation at certain points, especially men who are ambitious. And then you medicate that lack of dopamine with pornography. And then you fool yourself into thinking that, oh, it's because I viewed pornography that I don't feel motivated to work anymore. When in reality, you're actually not feeding your ambition. Your ambition has to be fed. Some people may have a chip on their shoulder from growing up with nothing and they want to make something of themselves. Others have a strong desire to create something in the world, and a byproduct of that is wealth and financial freedom. Yet others are constantly finding things that push them. Maybe somebody treated you wrong. Maybe you see some injustice in the world. Maybe you're just angry at not being able to just make ends meet. And you use that anger to fuel your work, to fuel you changing your life. But as you get to certain levels, you get frustrated because you normalize at that level. You're like, man, I was just trying to get to a place where I was no longer living with my parents. Now I'm living on my own. Some guys will normalize that, just moving into a studio apartment, and life suddenly gets hard for them again. Others will keep going and they're like, yeah, I got myself a nice girlfriend. We're working out. And then we moved from one place, like a larger apartment or a rented townhouse, and then they normalized there. Others still would be like, yeah, we're going to have a kid and we're going to get a mortgage and buy a first home. And then they normalize there. Like they normalize in multiple areas there. But there are successful men who keep growing and adding things to their life in a quest to somehow become happier. And at a certain point, most come to realize that there's no point to it. You're just like, man, I'm starting to realize that I was happy when I was just working and I had nothing. Like when I was working towards a large goal and I had nothing in my life. But now I have all these things. And when I think of like, well, why don't I just let everything go and just go back to working for the joy of working? I'm faced with the reality that I'm a much older man now. And I can't afford to do those things I was doing when I was in my 20s. I can't afford to go back to that. I now have people who are dependent on me. This is complex because now you might end up losing your drive. You're wondering why the heck you're doing this and what you're working towards. You've created a lifestyle and dependencies. People are dependent on you. Your wife's dependent on you. Your kids are dependent. All these things are dependent on you, yet you cannot let it go and you're no longer feeling the drive to move forward. One of the things that men will end up medicating with pornography, but it's also that which will keep you from seeking help because what's the point? That is existential dissatisfaction. The fifth is delayed intervention. And delayed intervention is finding help on time. As you can see, all these things from struggling with your autonomy to external pressure to dealing with like what's the point of my life to an identity crisis with your self-image. All of these things are pushing the day you seek help further and further and further. Because on the surface, things seem okay. On the surface, it's easy to be grateful. It's easy to go to church and pray and come out with that glow of connection with people. It's easy to sit down with your kids and be very thankful for the life you can provide for them and your family. All of these things are easy compared to finding the problem and seeking a solution. When I say finding the problem, I mean you are looking at pornography and going like, oh, that's the problem. But that isn't the problem. But you don't know that yet. If you knew what the true problem was, you would have quit pornography. So you keep trying to control your behavior with pornography. You keep trying to fix that part of it, and your life is okay on the other side, and you're grateful for it. So you don't think you have a big problem. You're like, I just got a little dependence on pornography, but apart from that, I'm blessed. No, bro, you got a lot of shit going on in your life, and you're too busy, too occupied with your identity crisis, your struggle with autonomy, your issues with your existence, and all the external pressures to actually seek help. Are you seeing how all this comes together? The final part of this in the success reboots paradox, that's just what I'm naming it, is a sort of psychological isolation. This psychological isolation comes from the grind. And when I say the grind, it just encompasses everything that you have had to do to get to where you are today as a successful man. Everything you've had to do. The long hours, the cutting off certain emotions or compartmentalizing certain emotions to make hard decisions, like firing people who've worked with you for a long time, like making financial decisions without emotions. You really have to compartmentalize that. Shutting down certain divisions, starting certain businesses, dealing with certain clients, the struggle that you have to deal with throughout the day. And then you have to come back to your family, to your loved ones, and you can't dump everything on them either. You have to learn how to compartmentalize that. Over the years of compartmentalizing, in order for you to become successful, and I don't care what it is that you do, I want to make this clear. If you're listening to this and going like, oh, I'm not some uber wealthy guy, it doesn't matter. If you're working towards it, you're still going to be a victim, I would say, of some of these things that I've talked about, especially the psychological alienation, which I would argue is even more in those who are aspirational, those who are working really hard towards something because you're putting in a lot of effort to make sure you're not distracted, to separate yourself from family members and friends who might say certain things that will take you off track in your goal, to have certain success mindsets, requires you to really go deep into yourself while working on yourself. But that psychological alienation also does not lend itself to asking for help. So there are a lot of people who are very successful on their own, and they get to a certain point and then they pull back from some of the people that have been helping them. There are others who refuse to get help. I'm one of the first people who will tell you that I worked very hard on my own till I hit a certain point and I was like, there's no way I can do this on my own anymore. I need to apply the things I learned as a rebooter, overcoming my behavior, and seek help. And then I found myself coaches, and I paid coaches, and I got into communities, which I am in till today. And because of that, because I stepped out of the psychological alienation in multiple areas of my life, I was able to seek help. But there are many successful people who will seek help, get to a certain point, and they will pull back in again. Sometimes your behavior may cause you to pull back in because of the shame that comes with it. And so you alienate yourself, you isolate yourself from everybody who could help you. It does make you more successful in some cases, one could argue, but at the same time, it feeds your out of control behavior. So those are some of the 6 things I've identified which affect you as a successful individual, but really also hold you back from seeking help. A good part of this message is not just to those of you who already have success, because I know if you're still listening to this now, you're an individual who's successful, but I also know that there are many of you who are still listening who are on the way there. You have the self-image and you're just on the path. And I want you to know that it is not black and white. It is not, oh, I deal with this behavior with porn, therefore I'm not going to be successful, or it's standing in my way. It is not something I can explain it in the podcast, but really it's not worth my time. I'd much rather explain to men how they can deal with their behavior and how they can develop certain principles. But it is truly by going through the stage of your reboot, after the early reboot called the middle stage of your reboot, that you start to see both sides of the coin. You start to see how the symptoms of your behavior, you always thought those were impacting you. And that's really more common in unsuccessful men. If I was to put it in a very simple terms, not to insult anybody, but just in a way everybody could understand this, is that unsuccessful men think that it is the symptoms of their behavior with pornography that are holding them back. Whereas successful men understand that it is the things they're actually medicating with their behavior that is holding them back. And that's why their worlds are completely different. That's the reason why there is an intensive program and there is an implementation program, because those are 2 different types of people. And the men who enter the intensive program, it doesn't mean that they are completely on the what am I medicating part of the coin, but it does mean that they have awareness of both sides at the very least. I hope you find that helpful. I want to shout out to the brothers who have been actually emailing me when I've mentioned, shoot me an email about what you think when it comes to the podcast, but I should have mentioned something. If you're in the implementation or the intensive program, you don't need to email me. Like, you got access to me. Just post in the group, bro. Like, I'll see it. But if you're not in our groups and you have some feedback on any of these, I actually tell my assistants to kind of put them aside, as long as you put at least the word podcast in your subject line, and I read them on the days that I hop into my inbox to read my email. I love those emails. They're so thoughtful, and they've generated some great discussions. It's just, I like to talk about these things and communicate and share. It's not all about, oh, join Porn Reboot and Elevated Recovery. This is something that I dealt with. This is something that I'm very passionate about. And I've actually gotten some really great guys who just like send me studies. They find these really cool studies, sociological studies on pornography addiction and human behavior. And they're like, oh my God, I know who's going to geek out over this. And they shoot me an email. And I love those. So please, let's communicate. It is always relational over transactional here at Elevated Recovery.
I'm JK, your brother in this struggle. Thank you so much for listening to this episode of the Porn Reboot podcast. I'll speak to you later on in the week. If you found this episode helpful, here are 4 ways I can help you with your out of control sexual behavior for free. The first way is to grab a free copy of my book, Confessions of a Porn Addict, 7 Secrets of Porn-Free Men at elevatedrecovery.org, or visit the link in the description below this episode. The second way is, if you're not sure where to start, but you'd like to learn more about my team and I, if you'd like to spend time with like-minded professionals and business owners who are controlling their behavior, then join our free and confidential group, the Porn Reboot group on Facebook. There's a link to join in the description below this episode. The third way is, if you need help right now because you have a burning issue, your behavior with pornography is hurting you mentally or emotionally, you're about to lose your relationship, you want to live up to your potential, be an authentic man, and free yourself from shame, guilt, and underachieving, then click on the link in the description below this episode that says free coaching call. And the fourth way is to leave us a 5-star review if you enjoy this podcast, so that we can reach more men who are struggling in silence and bring back the lessons we learn from coaching them to freedom.